So what the heck is a shell exactly? Well, to answer that, let's step back a little bit first and think about what exactly a computer is. At the core of your operating system, there's a little nugget called the kernel. The kernel's job is to manage all the other pieces of software that are running on the system. This can include other parts of the operating system, as well as any applications the user loads. In the olden days, before anyone had really dreamt of using a graphical interface, they were using the shell to interact with the kernel. The shell's only job was to print a prompt and wait for user input. Once a user issued a command, this command was taken and turned into an action. Usually this was running some program or something. In our case, we've been using a shell called bash, which stands for Born Again shell. If you happen to be using terminal on the Mac, then this is the default. The particular shell you're using is what defines which commands will be available to you. In general, there are two modes that your shell can be run in. First, there's a distinction between interactive and non-interactive shells. So far, we've been using interactive shells. A non-interactive shell can occur anytime a command is run, but it's not run directly as a result of a user telling it to run. The second distinction is between login and non-login shells. A shell session associated with a logged-in user is considered a login shell. When you start a new session, there's usually one or more startup files that get run and set up your bash environment. For example, if you're on a Mac, each time you start up terminal, the file called .bash profile will be run.
So while we've been going through this course, you may have noticed that your command line doesn't look nearly as cool as my command line. That's because I've done a little bit of custom configuration in a few of the files that are hidden in my base directory. Let's go ahead and see how exactly we can do this. To find these hidden files, like I mentioned before, you can do ls-a to show all files. And if we look around, we see a lot of config files. We have the .vim, .ssh, .subversion. The one we want to edit is called .bash profile. And if you don't have one, you can make a new one. Sometimes you have one by default. So I'm going to go ahead and do vim and then .bash _ profile. And the first thing we're going to do is add a few aliases. These can come in really handy when you get tired of typing the same commands over and over. And all they really are is a shortcut for typing something longer. First, we'll add one for the history command. I don't really like typing out history. Instead, I prefer to do h. So to make an alias h, you do alias space h and then equals history. And it is important to make sure there's no space between the h and the equals and the history. Next, let's add a similar one for clear. We'll do alias c equals clear. Don't have to type that whole word out anymore. And then we'll add one called ll. The L flag tells the ls command to show a lot of details about each file. And then the H flag specifies that we should show unit suffixes for our file sizes. So instead of just saying like 1000, we can say 1 GB for 1 gigabyte. Finally, we'll add one that's only really useful if you're an iOS developer. But if you are, it's really nice. In general, if there's some place you need to get to quickly on your system pretty often, then it's nice to just throw a quick alias in for it so you don't have to type out the path all the time. On these last two, you may have noticed that we had to surround them by double quotes. This is because we didn't just use a command, but we used a command that had a space in it. Once you've finished adding all these, go ahead and go back to your command line. And then we'll use a command called source. All you do is say source, and then pass in bash profile. And this will just run that configuration file and change your terminal to actually use the changes that have been made. Now we can go ahead and hit C and then return, and clear happens instead. Next, let's go ahead and do something about this boring prompt we have here. First, go back into bash profile. And what we'll do next is we'll define a variable called ps1. So if we come down here, we'll say ps1 equals. And this is a special variable, and if it exists, it defines what your prompt actually looks like. And there's also ps2 and 3, and these kind of affect like what it looks like while you're in the middle of editing something, but for now we'll just change ps1. So to get it to look like mine normally does, we can use a few special characters. First, let's just start things off with a new line, and then we'll add a \w. This means that the first thing we want to show is our current working directory. Next, we'll do a space and a \u. The u means we want to put our username in here. In this case, it'll be Luke Parham. And then we'll do an @ and a /h. And the H stands for the host name of this machine. Finally, we'll just do one more new line, and then we'll add that right arrow and a space to end things off. And that's all there really is to it. Let's go ahead and get out of this. And then source bash profile one more time. And as you can see, now our command prompt looks like it used to. Now, this was just an introduction to doing this kind of configuration stuff, but there is pretty much infinite options out there as far as customizing your command line, customizing Git, customizing your Vim setup. So I encourage you to go out there, find other people's .files, and just kind of look into how you can make things fit exactly how you want them to be.